The sky didn't just rain. It wept with a violent, jagged fury that turned the Blackwood River into a churning throat of white water and debris. Cooper Barnes lunged toward the muddy bank, the muscles in his chest screaming as he fought the current. He wasn't a hero. He was a man who had come to the woods to forget the world, but the world had just thrown a life into his lap. He saw her, a flash of ivory skin and tangled dark hair swirling in the center of the vortex. Without a second thought he dove. The water was ice, a physical blow that tried to steal the air from his lungs, but he reached out, his fingers locking onto the fabric of a waterlogged dress. "I've got you," he roared over the thunder, though she couldn't hear him. She was limp, a ghost already fading. With a desperate, bone-cracking heave, he dragged her onto the silty shore, his lungs burning with the metallic taste of adrenaline. He pressed his ear to her chest. Nothing. Then a ragged, wet gasp tore from her throat. She was alive, but barely. Her face held an unsettling, ethereal beauty that seemed to glow even in the mud, a face that felt like a memory he couldn't quite grasp. He carried her to his cabin, shivering and drenched, certain he was simply performing a final act of mercy for a stranger he would never see again once the ambulances could reach this remote trail. Hello to my wonderful viewers. I am so incredibly happy to have you back with us for this journey. Where are you watching from today? Are you tucked away in a quiet corner of the world like our protagonist, or are you in the middle of a bustling city? Drop your location in the comments. I love reading where our community gathers. If you're feeling the tension of this stormy night, please do me a huge favor and hit that subscribe button. It helps us keep these stories alive, and trust me, the mystery of the woman in the river is only just beginning. Cooper spent the night by the fireplace, wrapped in a blanket, watching her shallow breathing from across the room. He had laid her on the sofa, covered in wool, her skin pale as moonlight. As the storm finally broke into a bruised purple dawn, exhaustion claimed him. He fell into a heavy, dreamless sleep, expecting to wake up to the sound of sirens or the quiet stillness of his solitary life. But when the first sliver of gold light cut through the kitchen window, Cooper didn't wake up to silence. He woke to the smell of rain-damp earth and something else, something like wild jasmine. He stepped into the kitchen, rubbing the sleep from his eyes, and stopped cold. His heart performed a violent thud against his ribs. There she was. The stranger wasn't on the sofa. She was standing by his scarred wooden table, bathed in the dawn light. She wasn't shivering. She wasn't pale. She was standing perfectly still, looking out at the river that had tried to kill her, wearing one of his oversized flannel shirts. She turned slowly, her eyes, a startling deep violet, meeting his. She didn't look like a victim. She looked like she had been waiting for him for a lifetime. "You're awake," she whispered, her voice a melody that vibrated in the very marrow of his bones. Cooper's hand shook as he gripped the doorframe. "Who are you? How are you even standing?" The question hung in the air, heavier than the humidity of the storm. She didn't answer with a name. She simply stepped toward him, and in that moment the isolation of the woods felt like a cage. He had pulled her from the river to save her life, but as he looked into those violet eyes, a terrifying thought surfaced. Maybe she was the one who had come to claim his. The silence in the kitchen was thick, broken only by the rhythmic ticking of the heirloom clock on the mantel. Cooper Barnes, or Cooper the Ghost McLean Sullivan as he was known in the high-stakes world of investigative journalism he'd fled, felt a cold sweat prickle his neck. For years, Cooper's deepest desire was to be invisible. He had spent his career exposing the skeletons of the powerful until one story went too far, costing him his partner and his peace of mind. He moved to this cabin in the Cascades to bury his fear of being found, yet here was a woman who had bypassed every alarm in his soul just by standing still. He watched her move. There was a strange, fluid grace to her, a lack of the jagged trauma one would expect from a near drowning. "I'm Ada Ripley Lovelace," she said, her voice steady. She didn't offer a last name, but the names she did give sent a jolt through him. They were the names of his grandmother and his mother, two women who had passed long before he'd moved to these woods. A coincidence? In Cooper's world, coincidences were just clues that hadn't been connected yet. "Ada," Cooper repeated, his voice raspy. "You were dead in that water, Ada. I pulled you out. Your heart wasn't beating. No one recovers like this in 4 hours. Who sent you? Was it the cartel? Was it the senator's people?" Ada didn't flinch at his interrogation. Instead she walked toward him, stopping just inches away. She smelled of the river, cold, ancient and deep, but beneath it was that haunting jasmine. No one sent me, Cooper. I came because the river finally let go of the secret you've been keeping. Cooper's heart hammered. He had a hidden depth, a safe buried beneath the floorboards containing the Blackwood files, the evidence that could still bring down a multi-billion-dollar energy conglomerate responsible for the very pollution that was killing this river. He had never told a soul. "How do you know my name?" he hissed. "I know more than your name," she whispered, reaching out to touch the scar on his forearm, a souvenir from the night his life fell apart. "I know why you can't sleep when it rains. I know why you stopped writing." Supporting her presence was an aura of mystery that drew him in despite his survival instincts. She seemed to know the geography of his grief better than he did. As she spoke, Cooper felt an unwanted empathy stir. He saw a loneliness in her eyes that mirrored his own, a sense of being a castaway in a world that didn't understand her. Outside, the first light of day revealed the true extent of the storm's wreckage. Trees were uprooted and the river was still a bloated, angry beast. But inside the kitchen, the atmosphere was shifting from fear to an intense, magnetic intrigue. "You're hiding something," Cooper said, though his grip on his suspicion was slipping. "People don't just wash up with the answers to a man's life." "Maybe they do," Ada replied, a small, sad smile playing on her lips. "When that man is the only one left who can fix what's broken." The stakes were suddenly higher than a simple rescue. Cooper realized that by pulling her from the water he hadn't just saved a life. He had reopened a door to a past he thought was dead and buried. And Ada, with her violet eyes and his mother's name, was holding the key. The fragile morning peace shattered when a low, rhythmic thumping began to vibrate through the cabin floor. Not the sound of the river but the heavy blades of a helicopter cutting through the mountain mist. Cooper's instincts, honed from years of looking over his shoulder, screamed. He lunged for the window, peering through the pines. A black, unmarked bird was hovering over the clearing, its spotlight, unnecessary in the daylight but used as a tool of intimidation, sweeping the mud. "They found you," Ada said. Her voice wasn't panicked. It was heavy with a weary certainty. "They..." Cooper turned, his face hardening. "I've been a ghost for 3 years, Ada. Nobody finds me unless they've been tipped off. Was it you? Did you lead them here?" Before she could answer, the front door of the cabin didn't just open. It was kicked off its hinges. 2 men in tactical gear, faces obscured by balaclavas, stormed in. They weren't police and they weren't the Blackwood mercenaries he remembered. These men moved with a terrifying, synchronized efficiency. "Package identified," the lead man barked into a comms unit. He didn't look at Cooper. He looked at Ada. Cooper didn't hesitate. He grabbed a heavy iron poker from the fireplace, stepping between the armed men and the woman he'd pulled from the river. "Get out of my house," he growled. The soldier leveled a suppressed submachine gun at Cooper's chest. "Step aside, Mr. Sullivan. Our business is with the asset. You were never supposed to survive the rescue." The word asset sent a chill down Cooper's spine. In that moment of life-or-death tension, the first major plot twist hit. Ada didn't cower behind him. She stepped forward, her hand grazing Cooper's shoulder. As she did, the lights in the cabin flickered and died, and the air grew static heavy, smelling of ozone and river silt. "He stays," Ada said. Her voice wasn't a whisper anymore. It carried the weight of a physical blow. One of the men lunged for her. With a movement too fast for the human eye to track, Ada caught his wrist. There was a sickening crack, not of bone, but of the soldier's high-tech exoskeleton snapping like dry wood. She threw him across the room with effortless, terrifying strength. "Cooper, go to the cellar," Ada shouted, her violet eyes now glowing with an unnatural, bioluminescent intensity. "Now." "I'm not leaving you," Cooper roared, swinging the poker and catching the second man in the side of the helmet, knocking him back. But the central challenge was revealed when a third figure stepped through the ruined doorway. He wasn't wearing tactical gear. He wore a crisp charcoal suit and carried an air of boardroom authority. It was Arthur Sterling Vane, the CEO of the company Cooper had been investigating, a man who had been reported dead in a plane crash 2 years ago. "Hello, Cooper," Arthur said, stepping over the threshold. "I see you've met our project. We've spent billions trying to retrieve her from that crash site in the river. She isn't just a woman, Cooper. She's the living database of every secret my family has ever buried." And you, in your typical meddling fashion, decided to play the hero. The shock of seeing a dead man alive, combined with the revelation that Ada was some kind of bioengineered repository of information, forced Cooper into a split-second decision. He could surrender and live, or he could protect the woman who looked like his mother and held the keys to his redemption. He grabbed Ada's hand. Her skin was burning hot now, the water from the river seemingly steaming off her in the morning light. "The cellar," Cooper whispered, leaning into her ear. "There's a tunnel to the old mine." As they dove for the hidden hatch, Arthur leveled a sleek high-tech device toward them. "You can't run from the truth, Cooper. You're both part of the legacy now." The floorboards exploded behind them as they tumbled into the darkness. The hunt hadn't just begun. It had evolved into a war for the very soul of the Blackwood River. The old mine shaft was a damp, claustrophobic labyrinth of rotting timber and weeping stone. The smell of wet earth was thick, but it couldn't mask the growing attraction and the mounting fear between them. Cooper led the way, his flashlight beam cutting through the dark like a blade. Every few feet he looked back at Ada. She was shivering now, the bioluminescent glow in her eyes fading back to that haunting violet. "Are you okay?" he whispered, his voice echoing off the low ceiling. "I'm stabilizing," Ada replied, her voice strained. "The energy required to interface with their tech, to break the exoskeleton, it drains the cellular reserves. I wasn't designed for sustained combat, Cooper. I was designed for storage. For memory." As they moved deeper into the mountain, the romantic subplot began to pull at the edges of their survival mission. In the cramped silence of the tunnels, Cooper found himself watching the way the light caught the angles of her face. She looked so much like the women from his past, yet she was something entirely new. When the tunnel narrowed, forcing them to squeeze through a gap in the rock, his hand brushed against hers. The heat from earlier had turned into a gentle, pulsing warmth. "Why do you have my mother's name?" Cooper asked, his voice low. "If you're a database, why her?" Ada stopped, her breath hitching. "Because the man who designed my neural architecture wasn't just a scientist. He was a man in love. Your father didn't die in that hit and run, Cooper. He was taken. He spent 20 years in a Sterling lab, building me as a vessel for the evidence he'd gathered. He named me after the women he lost so he would never forget why he was fighting." The revelation was a physical weight, a blow to the heart that left Cooper breathless. His father was alive. Or at least he had been. The obstacles were no longer just men with guns. They were the ghosts of a family history he'd tried to bury. But they didn't have time to process the grief. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit echoed through the shaft. Arthur's men weren't using dogs. They were using acoustic sensors. The thud of their boots was getting closer. "We need to move," Cooper urged, pulling her into a side cavern. He planted a series of red herrings, leaving his flashlight on a ledge pointing toward a dead-end drop and dropping his damp flannel shirt to lead the sensors astray. It was a trick he'd learned from a source in the Special Forces years ago. "This way," he whispered, guiding her toward a hidden egress that opened onto a high ridge overlooking the river. They emerged into the biting mountain air, the wind whipping Ada's hair across her face. Below them, the Blackwood River was a silver ribbon of chaos. For a moment they were safe, huddled together under a rocky overhang. "You're growing," Ada said softly, looking at him. "The man who hid in the woods is gone. I can see the fire in you now. The same fire your father had." "I just want to finish this," Cooper admitted, his eyes fixed on hers. The tension between them wasn't just about the hunt. It was the growing hope that they could actually win. "I want the truth to be enough for once." But the hope was fragile. As they looked toward the horizon, they saw not one but 3 helicopters converging on their position. Arthur Sterling Vane wasn't just looking for a package. He was scorched earthing the entire mountain range to ensure his secrets stayed underwater. The ridge was narrowing, the drop-off into the churning Blackwood River becoming a sheer vertical plunge of 300 feet. As the helicopters banked toward them, their searchlights pinning Cooper and Ada against the wet granite like insects on a board, the roar of the engines drowned out the world. "Nowhere left to run, Cooper." Arthur's voice boomed from a loudspeaker on the lead chopper. "Give us the girl, and I might let you go back to your quiet little life of hiding." Cooper pulled Ada closer, his back against the cold stone. "He's lying," Cooper whispered. "He doesn't leave witnesses." "I know," Ada said. She looked at Cooper, her expression shifting from fear to a profound, tragic clarity. She grabbed his hands and suddenly the bioluminescent glow returned, but it wasn't just in her eyes. It was pulsing through her skin, a rhythmic golden light that synchronized with her heartbeat. Cooper, there's something you need to see. I didn't just wash up in the river because of the storm. I was pushed. What are you talking about? Look into the light, she commanded. As he stared into her eyes, the world around them, the helicopters, the rain, the wind, faded into a digital haze. A game-changing revelation flooded Cooper's mind. He wasn't just seeing memories. He was seeing the last 30 seconds of the plane crash that had supposedly killed Arthur Sterling Vane 2 years ago. In the vision, Cooper saw his father, gray-haired and weary, sitting in the back of the private jet. But his father wasn't a prisoner. He was the one holding the briefcase. And the man sitting across from him wasn't Arthur. It was a body double. The twist hit like a physical punch. Arthur Sterling Vane never survived the crash because Arthur Sterling Vane never existed. The man in the suit, the man chasing them right now, was actually Cooper's own father, Thomas Sullivan McLean, who had undergone radical plastic surgery and assumed the identity of the billionaire he had accidentally killed years ago. He hadn't been a victim of the company. He had staged a coup and become the monster he once fought. The project wasn't a database for justice. It was a failsafe. If Thomas's new identity was ever challenged, Ada was the only thing that could verify his biological signature to keep control of the empire. The man in that helicopter. He isn't Arthur, Cooper gasped, his mind reeling as the vision faded. He's my father. The revelation challenged everything Cooper believed. His hero, his motivation for his entire career, was the antagonist of the story. The romantic connection he felt with Ada deepened in that moment of shared vulnerability. She was the only one who knew the truth of his bloodline, the only one who saw the stain on his soul. He doesn't want the secrets out, Ada whispered, tears mingling with the rain on her cheeks. He wants me so he can delete the parts of his memory that still feel guilt. He wants to become the lie permanently. The stakes were at their highest point. Cooper wasn't just fighting a billionaire, he was fighting his own father for the right to exist. Suddenly, the lead helicopter tilted forward, the side door sliding open. The man who looked like Arthur Sterling Vane stood there, holding a high-frequency transmitter. He pressed a button and Ada screamed, her body arching in agony. "The connection is remote, Cooper," the man shouted over the wind. "I can override her systems from here. Step away from her or I'll fry her neural net." Cooper looked at Ada, then at the man in the sky who shared his DNA. He had to choose, the father who had become a monster, or the woman who was a ghost of his father's better half. The scream that tore from Ada's throat was a sound of digital and physical agony, a high-pitched frequency that seemed to vibrate the very air. Cooper lunged for her, but as his fingers brushed her arm, a massive discharge of static energy threw him backward. He hit the wet stone hard, his vision swimming with black spots. "Ada," he choked out, pushing himself up. The man in the helicopter, the man who was once Thomas Sullivan McLean, didn't flinch. He adjusted the dial on the transmitter. "I'm sorry, Cooper. I really am. But you were always too much like your mother. Too much conscience, not enough vision. I built her to remember the man I was, but that man is a liability now." A beam of concentrated ultraviolet light shot from the helicopter's underside, locking onto Ada. She was lifted inches off the ground, her body rigid, her violet eyes turning a dull, flickering gray. The darkest hour had arrived. Cooper watched in horror as the woman he was beginning to love was systematically being erased. The memories of his father's kindness, the evidence of the Sterling crimes, the jasmine-scented soul of the woman standing in his kitchen, it was all being overwritten by lines of cold, black code. "Stop it. You're killing her," Cooper roared, grabbing a jagged piece of granite and hurling it at the chopper, a futile gesture of desperation. "I'm perfecting her," his father replied, his voice cold and amplified. "And once she's wiped, I'll have the paramedics pick you up. You'll have a nice, quiet life in a private facility. No more stories, Cooper. No more ghosts." Seemingly insurmountable obstacles mounted as the second and third helicopters descended, their skids nearly touching the ridge. Mercenaries in specialized dampening suits stepped out, moving toward the paralyzed Ada. They ignored Cooper as if he were already a ghost. Separation was total. Ada was trapped in a cage of light and code, her consciousness slipping away. Cooper was pinned by the downdraft of the rotors, his strength failing, his home destroyed, and his father revealed as a tyrant. He looked at Ada one last time, seeing a single violet tear track down her cheek before her eyes went completely dark. "Package secured," the lead mercenary called out, reaching for Ada's limp form. The situation was hopeless. Cooper collapsed onto his knees, the freezing rain soaking through his clothes. He had lost everything, his past, his purpose, and now the only person who truly knew him. The river roared below, a hungry mouth waiting for the remains of his life. As the mercenaries hoisted Ada into the helicopter, Cooper felt a void open in his chest that no amount of investigative truth could ever fill. He was alone on a mountain watching his father fly away with his soul. The helicopters began their ascent, the heavy thrum of the rotors vibrating through Cooper's very bones. He lay in the mud, a broken man, but as the wind from the departing birds whipped the river spray against his face, a realization sparked. "I built her to remember the man I was." His father's words echoed in his mind. Thomas hadn't just built a database, he had built a mirror. And a mirror doesn't just store an image, it reflects it. Cooper felt his hand brush against the pocket of his damp trousers. Inside was the old brass compass his father had given him as a boy, the one he had clutched every night since he'd moved to the cabin. It wasn't just a trinket. He remembered the bioluminescent heat of Ada's skin when she touched him. He realized the project wasn't just digital, it was sympathetic. "Ada!" Cooper roared, standing up against the gale. He didn't look at the helicopters. He looked into his own heart, into the memories of the man his father used to be. I remember the jasmine. I remember the river." In the lead helicopter, Ada's gray, vacant eyes suddenly twitched. Deep within her neural architecture, a hidden key was turning. Thomas had programmed her to be overwritten by him, but he had forgotten that Cooper shared his biological frequency. Cooper wasn't just the sun, he was the backup. Suddenly, the ultraviolet beam locking Ada down didn't just flicker. It reversed. A surge of golden light erupted from Ada's chest, flowing down the beam and back into the helicopter systems. The electronics screamed. The cockpit displays went haywire, showing a single image, a photo of Cooper as a child sitting on his father's shoulders. The turning point hit with the force of an explosion. The mercenaries were thrown back as Ada stood up, her eyes burning with a violet fire that was brighter than ever before. She hadn't been erased, she had been awakened. "Thomas," Ada said, her voice echoing through the calms of every chopper. "You can delete a file. But you cannot delete a soul." The helicopter began to spin, the pilot losing control as the digital ghost of Thomas's past self flooded the flight computer. "Cooper, jump!" Ada screamed, her voice reaching him through the mountain air, clear as a bell. She didn't mean for him to jump off the cliff. She lunged toward the open door, grabbing a coil of high-tension cable. With her enhanced strength, she hurled it toward the ridge. It wrapped around the ancient, sturdy trunk of a mountain pine just as Cooper caught the other end. Hope flared like a signal fire. Cooper wrapped the cable around his arm, bracing himself. He wasn't running anymore. He was the anchor. "Dow, Ada." He didn't hesitate. She dove from the spinning helicopter, a fallen star against the dark sky. The cable snapped taut, the force nearly tearing Cooper's arm from its socket, but he held on. He held on with the strength of a man who had finally found something worth keeping. Ada swung toward the cliffside, landing in the mud beside him. The lead helicopter, now a smoking wreck of haywire tech, veered away, struggling to stay airborne as Thomas Sullivan McLean realized he had lost his failsafe forever. They stood together on the ridge, drenched and bruised, but united with a deeper understanding than they had ever known. The key to solving the conflict wasn't a weapon. It was the truth that Thomas couldn't hide from himself. "He's going to the refinery," Ada gasped, her breath warm against Cooper's neck. "That's where the master server is. If we get there, we can broadcast the Blackwood files to every screen on the planet." "Then let's finish it," Cooper said, his courage forged in the fire of his father's betrayal. "Let's show him that the ghost still has a story to tell." The Sterling Blackwood refinery was a sprawling industrial fortress of hissing steam and skeletal steel, glowing like a malevolent ember against the dark mountain skirts. Cooper and Ada didn't approach like thieves. They arrived like a reckoning. Using the chaos of the storm and Ada's ability to speak to the electronic perimeter, they bypassed the thermal sensors and moved toward the central spire, the heart of Thomas's digital empire. "He's in the server vault," Ada whispered, her violet eyes scanning the blueprints flickering in her mind. "He's trying to initiate a global wipe. If he succeeds, every piece of evidence your father, the real Thomas, ever collected will be gone forever." They burst into the vault, a room chilled to sub-zero temperatures and lined with humming obsidian towers. There, standing before a massive holographic interface, was the man who had stolen Cooper's father's face. He looked older now, the strain of the digital battle carving deep lines into his borrowed features. "You don't understand, Cooper," Thomas said, his voice echoing through the sterile chamber. "The world needs the order I provide. The Blackwood files would collapse the energy grid. Millions would starve. I'm not a monster, I'm a stabilizer." "You're a murderer who wears a mask," Cooper countered, stepping into the blue light of the servers. "You killed the man you were to become the thing you hated." The final confrontation began not with fists, but with a thrilling clash of wills. Thomas activated the room's automated defense system, high-frequency sonic emitters designed to scramble Ada's neural net. She dropped to her knees, gasping as the sound waves tore at her consciousness. "I gave you life, Ada." Thomas roared, his hands dancing across the hologram. "I can take it back." But Thomas had made one final fatal mistake. He had developed all his skills in a lab. Cooper had developed his in the field. While Thomas was focused on Ada, Cooper utilized the skills he'd honed as an investigative reporter, the ability to find the single point of failure in any story. He didn't attack the man, he attacked the foundation. Cooper lunged for the cooling pipes, swinging a heavy fire axe with a hero's desperation. Frick! The liquid nitrogen hissed out, flash freezing the floor and sending the server temperatures into a critical spike. "The system is overheating, Thomas." Cooper shouted over the alarms. "The wipe is stalled. The only way to save the data is to let Ada interface directly." As the room began to glow a dangerous, pulsating red, the most surprising twist occurred. Ada didn't just upload the files, she reached out and grabbed Thomas's hand. "I remember the man you were," she whispered, her voice cutting through the klaxons. "And I know he's still in there, buried under the lies. Let him out, Thomas. Give the world back its truth." For a split second, the billionaire's mask slipped. Thomas Sullivan McLean looked at his son, then at the woman who carried his lost love's face. A single, genuine tear traced a path down his cheek. In that moment of authentic vulnerability, he didn't fight back. He slumped against the console, his hand falling away from the delete button. "Do it," Thomas whispered, his voice broken. "Tell the story, Cooper." Ada closed her eyes, her entire body erupting in a blinding golden supernova of data. Every screen in the refinery, every television in the city below, and every smartphone on the planet suddenly flickered. The Blackwood files began to scroll, a digital tsunami of truth that exposed decades of corruption, environmental destruction, and the secret life of the man who thought he was a god. The mystery was solved. The antagonist was defeated by the very memories he tried to kill. Justice wasn't just served, it was broadcast to the world. 6 months after the lights flickered in every home across the globe, the Blackwood River ran clear for the first time in a generation. The massive refinery, once a fortress of secrets, was being dismantled by environmental crews, its steel skeletons now perches for the hawks that had returned to the valley. Cooper McLean Sullivan sat on the porch of his rebuilt cabin, the smell of fresh cedar and pine needles filling the air. He wasn't hiding anymore. His name was back on the masthead of the world's most respected journals, but he no longer wrote from the shadows of fear. He wrote from a place of peace. The world knew the truth about the Sterling Empire, and his father, the man who had lost himself in the pursuit of a stable world, was now serving his time in a minimum security facility, finally undergoing the psychological help he had needed for decades. Cooper visited him every Sunday. They didn't talk about power, they talked about the river. The screen door creaked open and Ada stepped out. She looked different now, more human, less ethereal. The bioluminescent glow had settled into a soft, natural radiance in her eyes. Without the weight of the Sterling servers pressing against her mind, she had become her own person, a woman with her own dreams and a future that wasn't programmed by a lab. The morning light is perfect today, Ada said, her voice a warm melody that still made Cooper's heart skip a beat. She was holding 2 mugs of steaming coffee, the scent of jasmine trailing behind her like a familiar friend. Cooper stood up, taking a mug and pulling her close. The romantic conclusion felt earned, forged in the fires of betrayal and the freezing waters of the Blackwood. They had resolved the mystery of their past, and in doing so they had found a new beginning. "Where are we headed today?" Cooper asked, looking out at the trail that wound through the pines. "The Upper Falls," Ada replied, leaning her head on his shoulder. "I want to see the salmon jumping. I want to see life moving forward." The loose ends were tied. The ghost had found his voice and the database had found her soul. The woman who had washed up in the river was no longer a stranger standing in his kitchen. She was the partner who stood by his side, a living reminder that no matter how deep the water or how dark the storm, the truth always finds a way to the surface. As the camera pans back from the quiet cabin, we see the river flowing strong and pure, a symbol of recovery and redemption. The story that began with a desperate rescue ends with a sense of profound fulfillment and a love that was truly written in the stars. And the code. Thank you so much for sticking with us through this gripping mystery. It has been an absolute joy to bring Cooper and Ada's journey to life for you. Seeing a man confront his own history and a woman find her humanity is what storytelling is all about. If you loved this ending, please let us know in the comments by typing alive. Your support means the world to us. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell. We have so many more emotional, high-stakes stories coming your way that you won't want to miss. Until next time, remember, your past doesn't define you, but your courage does. See you in the next one. Think.